You have to open up the webinar. The attendees are still
okay.
zero.
No, it's okay. Okay.
Recording in progress. No.
Good morning, everyone. In fact, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on the time zone you are connecting upon. Welcome to our information session on questioning the purpose of UNHRC's Sri Lanka's Accountability Project. Today, we are joined by 4 distinguished guests and subject matter experts. I'm thankful to the Ontario Centre for Policy Research for inviting me to moderate today's event. Sri Lanka defeated LTTE, a ruthless terrorist organization, in 2009, and are now faced with lawfare by supported diaspora of this extremist agenda. Sri Lanka was, there were 2 resolutions passed in the UN, 30/1 and 46/1. And today's discussion will focus on our subject matter experts' opinion and their presentation on the subject. To start off with, we have Ms. Shivanti Ranasinghe. Shivanti graduated from the University of London with a Bachelor of Science in Honours in Computers and Information Systems, currently engaged in the study of geopolitical moves via Sri Lanka. These analyses are published in a weekly column maintained in Ceylon Today. This work includes the study of terrorism in Sri Lanka. This focuses on the insurgencies and unrest instigated by the Marxist political party, the JVP, the genesis, the development, and the ultimate annihilation of terrorism based on Tamil ethnicity, as well as the events taking place after the eradication of the terrorist organization, the LTTE. Equal attention is given to the creation of Wahhabism and the rise of Islam extremists in Sri Lanka. Now, Shivanti is going to be the first presenter. So Shivanti's presentation's core theme focuses on these accountability mechanisms, motive. As part of this effort, all the processes in this anti-Sri Lankan project will be briefly reviewed to understand each process's objective. The final segment discusses Sri Lanka's best strategy to counter this threat. Shivanti joins us from Colombo. Welcome, Shivanti.
Welcome. Thank you for that introduction, and Ayubowan to everybody. Now, the degree of success or failure of a project depends entirely on how much the outcome of that project satisfies the motive that initiated that project. This is the same case with the accountability mechanism pushed by the UNHRC High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, as well. But what we need to understand is the motive and the stated objectives need not necessarily be one and the same. Now, one might be inclined to presume that the motive of this accountability mechanism would be to deliver justice to those who were victimized by the Sri Lanka's war against terrorism. After all, this has been spearheaded by none other than the UNHRC High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet herself. But when you look at this entire anti-Sri Lankan project, with the Geneva Resolution 30/1 being the current mothership, and all the projects that piggybacked on it, and not just this accountability mechanism on its own, number of factors challenge this presumption. First of all, singling Sri Lanka out in this singular manner itself indicates that something is amiss and that the motive and the stated objectives do not see eye to eye. The second factor is that the track record of our accusers' human rights and humanitarian abuses are atrocious compared to the mere allegations leveled against Sri Lanka. Now, it is an established fact that the operandus modus operandi, of our accusers to further their hegemony interest is to politicize human rights, to bludgeon their intended targets, and thereby create confusion, and using that confusion to somehow gain an undue or unfair advantage. The third factor is, as exposed by WikiLeaks and revealed by Lord Nisby, we know that our accusers themselves have acknowledged that our Sri Lankan military have conducted themselves with the utmost professionalism and with compassion, and so much so that they have absorbed more casualties than demanded by the laws of proportionality to simply ensure the safety of those civilians who got trapped in the war zone, and especially in the human shield. Yet, as the fourth point would show, through a perverted strategy, allegations without merit or proof have been taken aboard and documented to give it a sense of legitimacy. To protect these falsehoods in these documents, the sources are hidden. This denies Sri Lanka the right to challenge her accusers. This is in itself is a perversion of justice. It must be noted that just because an allegation is documented, it doesn't make it credible. The fifth factor is the processes in this project and the sequence of processes are engineered in a dubious manner. This effort is obviously to force the outcome of these processes to satisfy a preconceived narrative. Any other process or evidence that does not support or satisfy this preconceived narrative are either studiously ignored or discredited without cause. The sixth factor is that all the processes in this project are punctuated by undisguised and deliberate gaps and partiality. These perversions ensure two definite outcomes. That is, only the Sri Lankan military will be held accountable and prosecuted, even though it is the LTTE who committed the war crimes, and the Sri Lankan national security will be severely weakened and impeded. The seventh factor is that there is no guarantee or assurance that by honoring the conditions dictated by this project will safeguard Sri Lanka from any future attack, from a terrorist attack, or that in the event of such an attack, that due support and assistance will be given to counter these kind of threats by either the UNHRC or the mechanism itself, or those who are the proponents of this project. Then the eighth factor is we are the ones who for decades have faced all forms of terrorism. And more importantly, we have resolutely and very successfully resolved each and every one of them. Whereas our accusers, on the other hand, have made an utter mess out of it, to the point where some nations have simply disintegrated. And what is contentious in here is that our accusers, at a point where it is convenient to them, they just pull out, leaving innocent civilians trapped within the grasp of brutal terrorists and extremists. So my question here is this. So how come our accusers have become the experts on terrorism and we, the students of it? The ninth factor is that challenge this presumption that this accountability mechanism's motive is to deliver justice are the gaps, the partiality, the dubiousness that have become the hallmarks of this entire project and which will disallow any one of its process to meet at least halfway point of its stated objective. So then it is obvious that instead of justice, that the driving factor behind this Geneva project is either sadism or a very sinister motive. A highlight in this anti-Sri Lanka project is the sudden visit by the then UNSG Ban Ki-moon, who came immediately once peace was ushered into the island. With him, he carried a very important message, a very simple message actually, and which was that the battlefields have shifted from the Wani jungles to the August halls of the UNHRC in Geneva. To understand the gravity of this message, we must go back to year 2002. This was the year that the infamous ceasefire agreement was signed between the government of Sri Lanka and the LTTE. The CFA 2002 and the Geneva Resolution 30/1 have very different objectives, yet they both have the same motive. Just like the UNHRC Resolution 30/1, which we co-sponsored in 2015, even though it was a resolution brought against Sri Lanka, this CFA 2002 was also authorized by Ranil Wickremesinghe without the knowledge of the executive president, without approval from the cabinet, without a debate in parliament, without consultation from the security establishment, and definitely without a mandate from the people. Just like the UNHRC Resolution 30/1, this CFA 2002 also sought to humiliate our security forces. Just like the UNHRC Resolution 30/1, the CFA2 insisted on repelling the PTA. Both these agreements gave legitimacy to illegal actors. It was the CFA 2002 that recognized the LTTE with equal parity as that of the government of Sri Lanka. But here's the thing, the LTTE was an illegal organization engaged in terrorism, whereas the government of Sri Lanka is a legitimate body democratically elected to govern the country. The funny thing here is, even though that on paper that the LTTE and the government of Sri Lanka were equal partners, somehow the LTT were the more equal partners. That is why, for instance, the LTT cadres had the freedom of movement at will to any part of the country, whilst the Sri Lankan forces were confined behind barracks. And at the same time, the LTT could flagrantly violate the terms and conditions of the CFA without any repercussions or consequences, whereas we were under severe pressure to walk on eggshells. In the same manner, the UNHRC Resolution 30/1 gives credibility to the transnational LTT network whilst demonizing the Sri Lanka military. This whole project is thus being fueled by those who want revenge for their bitter defeat. At this point, it is very important to not to mistake fuel with the vehicle. Fuel is something that only powers the vehicle into motion. In the same manner, the vehicle is not to be confused with the driver. The vehicle is simply a piece of machinery that obeys the driver. Now, this is a very important analogy we must understand when we study the different actors playing different roles in this project. Then again, the mantra throughout the CFA 2002 until the very end of the war was that, oh, you can never defeat the LTT can never be military defeated, all this is going to only cause, suffering to the civilians, so you must somehow come to some kind of a negotiated settlement. That was the mantra with the underlying intent to demoralize us into giving up. Now, the theme of the Geneva project is to discredit us. So then comes the question, why is such an elaborate and time-consuming plan with so many variables just to demoralize or discredit us? What is it that the West is hoping to gain from putting us down? Well, it is difficult to predict something that is yet to happen. From the ongoing high-profile UNHRC project, we can safely deduce that the West is yet to get what they are after. However, thanks to history, we are not entirely clueless. First of all, let's strike off all the least possible scenarios. This project is certainly not out of concern for the minorities or human rights, and this project is not to deliver any closure or justice. So is this because President Mahinda Rajapaksa didn't listen to the Western dictates and they got so offended and they want to put this small nation in its place and teach us a lesson? Well, if you study the environment that prevailed during the CFA 2002, that does not support this theory. Just 5 months before we signed the CFA 2002, the 9/11 took place. This led the US to declare war on all terrorists. In their definition of a terrorist, the US refused to accept struggles as freedom fights as justification for terrorism. Yet, the CFA 2002, in which the US was one of the 4 that constituted the co-chairs, the LTT was given equal parity as that of the government of Sri Lanka. This is not the only anomaly. In the aftermath of the 9/11, the US Homeland Security Act empowered law enforcement a virtual carte blanche to tackle terrorism on American soil or American interests. Black holes and enemy combatants are some of the new words or words with new interpretation that entered our vocabulary with the tougher laws introduced by the US to safeguard themselves from terrorism. But at the same time, the Sri Lankan government came under severe pressure to do away with our own PTA. Even after it became obvious that the LTTE was misusing the CFA to strengthen themselves, and they had absolutely no interest in the peace talks, the pressure continued to be on the government of Sri Lanka to somehow return to the negotiating table and come up with a political settlement with the LTT. And then throughout the war against terrorism, the West maintained a non-stop babble on human rights concerns, almost always with the index finger directed towards the Sri Lankan military. It was only when the West could simply not ignore the LTT atrocities that they issued a statement, and that too, a very watered down one. Perhaps had the US Republicans not lost to the Democrat Obama in 2009, and the hawkish Hillary did not become the state secretary, would Sri Lanka and US had continued with their good relationship that they had up to this point? Again, after studying the events in the past 2 decades, this is highly doubtful. For one thing, the US wanted the good relations that they had with Sri Lanka, especially during the last years of the war, to be kept a secret. That is why AXA was a hushed affair in Sri Lanka, whereas a similar agreement with Australia 2 years later on was not. Now, during this time, the LTT posed a problem for the US because the LTT was transferring technical know-how, especially on suicide bombing, and providing logistics support to the Al-Qaeda. So what did the US did was they provided the coordinates of these floating armories and LTT sea vessels to the Sri Lankan Navy. And the Sri Lankan Navy duly went and destroyed these vessels, which had a debilitating effect on the LTT, and that contributed to the defeat. But that's not the point here. The point here is, why did the US choose to pass on this intelligence to the Sri Lankan Navy instead of they themselves going and destroying these vessels? I mean, they have no compunction bombing entire countries. So why did they stop at just a few sea vessels? Anyone who uses somebody else to do their dirty work is not actually being a friend. They are someone with an agenda. It is true that the Sri Lanka-US relations rapidly nosedived during the Obama's regime. However, after the Republican Trump came to power in 2017, we still did not see an improvement or a change. Neither Atul Keshav nor Alina Teplitz, who functioned as the US ambassadors in the Trump's regime, showed a change in US foreign policy vis-a-vis Sri Lanka. In fact, it was Teplitz who worked overtime to reverse the 52-day government and reinstate Ranil Wickremesinghe as the premier. Now, the interesting fact here was the regime change was not a Republican investment. It was a Democrat's investment. So what was it that compelled Alina Teplitz, a civil servant representing the Republican government, to work overtime to safeguard a Democrat's investment? So this brings us to this question. Even if US had a Republican government instead of a Democrat government from 2009 onwards, whether we would have still faced the same belligerent attitude, whether these nonsensical, aggressive resolutions against Sri Lanka would have been brought forth at the UNHRC, and whether the attempts to topple governments, would they have taken place? When we consider the likelihood, I would say yes, most likely. Again, but what is the motive? If the West wants to subjugate us, they only simply have to train their guns on us. But, that would be very messy, costly, bloody, and it would even cost some American lives, which would not go very well with the American public. But for whatever reason, these and perhaps some others, obviously, a military invasion is not something that they are considering, at least for now. To understand the possible ulterior motive, however, the events that took place during the Yahapalna government offers us some vital clues. The first highlight is that our political leaders got discredited, and it is not only those who were in the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration. Until the central bank bond scams, Ranil Wickremesinghe was known as Mr. Clean. So what compelled him to destroy his own reputation? But more relevant to us is he got replaced by a very politically immature Sajid Premadasa. The incumbent government is currently attracting a lot of criticism and discontent, but the fact that none of it has translated into support for Premadasa is very telling indeed. But what we have to be mindful here is how this will affect those who are fast losing confidence in our political systems and how they may end up getting manipulated. The second highlight of the Yahapalna government is the deliberate economic sabotage. The bond scams, for instance, ensure that the interest rates shot right back to where it was during the height of the war. And amongst other things, the Yahapalna government went on a serious foreign loan binge. And they, in fact, released international sovereign bonds worth of 12 billion US dollars to be repaid at the same time to coincide when the other loans were maturing. So that is the repercussions we are riding out right now. The third highlight was that entire military intelligence units were arrested along with military commanders. And in the process, intelligence networks that took years to foster got exposed and destroyed. The fourth highlight, of course, was that we now have a new terrorist threat before us. The fifth and the most telling highlight that would tell us more about the motive is the 3 US agreements that came forth as AXA, SOFA, and MCC. Now, these 3 in combination would amount to us having virtually handed over our sovereignty to the US without the US having to fire a single bullet. So we must congratulate ourselves for a very narrow escape. Had we reacted emotionally in the aftermath of the Easter attack, it would have led to further bloodshed. This is attested by the swords that was found in the mosques, which indicate that the Easter attack was not intended to be a solo incident. It is interesting that the MCC was announced just about 4 days after the Easter attack, when the country was still reeling with shock. So had riots followed the Easter attack, it is most likely that the MCC would have had an easy passage amidst the confusion and not the stiff resistance it met from the nationalists instead. The anti-Sri Lanka project is still a developing story. This means we are still in control. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivanti, for that great presentation. Also, thank you for taking us back to 2002's agreement. Very key, very, very important lessons learned from there. Also, a great analogy on the different actors presenting this anti-Sri Lankan strategy. And also, thanks for clarifying the UN stand on freedom struggle and terrorism distinction established after 9/11. We have received some questions via email. Those attending this event can email office@policy-research.ca if you have any question. Again, the email address is office@policy-research.ca if you have any questions. And we will try to accommodate the questions that we are getting. However, given the time limitation, we will take some questions. So we have received two questions, and the first question for Shivanti is, how should Sri Lanka respond to this Western agenda? Shivanti, if you can explain in 2 minutes.
Of course, you see, if you look at this Western agenda, the main weapon they're using against us is a narration. This whole effort is to create this an agenda that discredits us. So what we need to do is, instead of engaging with this narrative, we must come up with our own narration. It is just a matter of great concern. You know, we had 12 years have passed, and the remarkable silence we maintain over our experiences. Today, children don't know what we went through. And there are so many anecdotal stories, so many stories of heroism and what it is to be Sri Lankan. The Sri Lankan values really came up during this very challenging period. And it is very sad we don't talk about it. So first thing what we need to do is get our story straight. And when we get our story straight, we must be very careful not to use their terminology. Now, for instance, I hear this word reconciliation a lot. But if you really look at this, what really took place, this was not a civil war between two communities. So there was no estrangement. In fact, during the height of the war, most of the Tamils in the north and east moved to the other parts to live amongst the Sri Lanka Sinhalese. I mean, even the Tamil politicians sought security from the Sinhala policemen than the Tamil policemen. So this was the kind of confidence that Tamils have of Sri Lanka, Sinhalese, and Sinhalese never objected to the fact that 14,500 Tamil terrorists were released without a day of prosecution or imprisonment. So this shows the amount of the close understanding that the two communities have. So we must refrain from using words such as reconciliation, which actually feeds against us. So this is what we need to do. We need to be very proud of how we met this challenge. We should not forget this, and we need to have a very strong story about it. This is the way to counter this Western agenda.
Thank you, Shivanti. The next question is, both Modi's government and TNA are pressurizing the government of Sri Lanka to implement the 13A in full, when both India and Sri Lankan politicians are advocating the same solution. How can you say that this is a foreign intervention?
Well, when you look at this whole thing, the interesting fact here is um, uh, always the foreign hand has not been that visible. Of course, the CFA 2002 was a Norwegian initiative. The Geneva resolution was led by the US. The core group on Sri Lanka is headed by UK. Then it's a Chilean former president who wants the accountability mechanism. That is also true. Where I can go on and on. It's a South African Yasmin Surka who is still active and promoting this false propaganda against Sri Lanka. But if you really look at it, this foreign hand is not that visible because the actors have always been the local agents. For instance, 30 years of terrorism was by the Sri Lankan Tamil youth. Not a single Indian youth came to fire or kill a single Sri Lankan. It was the Sri Lankan youth who are either misled or forced into taking arms against the Sri Lankan state. In the same way, it is the Tamil politicians who are advocating this agenda that India wants to, implement 13th Amendment in full. But if you, so it seems like this is what the minority communities want. But is it really? If it is so, then the Hapalna government should have been able to push it forward. But it was the minority parties themselves that were holding it back. The reason is simple. Now, even if you implement the 13th Amendment in full, unless you merge the North and the East together, the Tamils in the East would be suppressed or overridden by the Muslim population in the East. So, conversely, if you merge the two provinces, what will happen is the Tamils will be the overriding factor by an artificially bolstered number. So what happens is the 13th Amendment in full will not give you anything other than constant irritations and friction between communities. So I don't think we have to really elaborate who stands to gain from that. So it's not the Tamil politicians. So the interesting thing is how this Tamil politicians get, why these Tamil politicians are carrying an Indian agenda. It's not only the Tamil politicians. Now, even if you look at the civil societies, they are running after dollars. Most of them, not all, most of them. It's a very competitive thing. And to get sponsorship from these foreign embassies, they wittingly or unwittingly carry this, the Western agenda. And sometimes we have some other actors, for instance, Cardinal Ranjit. He's so angry with the government of Sri Lanka that he will do whatever the government wants, he will say no to it. So he recently, signed a petition brought by the TNA to do away with the PTA. Now, who wants the PTA out? So you see, sometimes because we allow our emotions to get in the way, sometimes in the greed for dollars, sometimes for our political survival, sometimes because we are being misled, we are getting manipulated. So it seems like this is what the Sri Lankan minority community or the Sri Lankan victims, this is what they want, but they are ultimately being manipulated by outside force. That is the reality of it.
Thank you, Shivanti. And thanks again for all your presentation efforts. And thanks for joining with us. Please stay until the end because we have a final roundtable. So hang in there. Next up, we have Mr. Jayaraj Palihavadna. He is a graduate of law and practicing solicitor in a reputed law firm in United Kingdom. He is the founder member of the Global Sri Lanka Forum UK, and is currently the CEO and the secretary of the organization. Through this organization, he directly involves in organizing activities and attending UN Human Rights Council sessions since 2017. Gerard is also the convener of the London Initiative, a public policy think tank. In 2017, for the first time with our intervention, they opposed the Tamil separatism, went to the Human Rights Council. This is a new phenomenon in the history of Sri Lanka and the HRC. Through the NGO Access, he managed to organize various activities, including submitting written submission, oral statements, and organizing protests, as well as photo exhibitions. Currently, he manages and coordinates the entire UNHR's Geneva program and administers the NGO with other GSLF EXCOM partners. His experience ranges from being a lawyer, activities in the non-governmental organizations, as well as most recent role working in the International Human Rights Commission as an ambassador to the UK. Now, Jairaj is traveling to the Human Rights Council as we speak. So we were able to get a video recording when he stopped for this presentation. So if there's any questions about his presentation and content, please again email. The address is office@policy-research.ca. So Dr. Neville, could you please play the content?
Thank you, Vol. As we are already aware that the 49th session of the Human Rights Council starts on the 28th of February, and the High Commissioner's written updates on Sri Lanka are scheduled on the 3rd of March, followed by the interactive dialogue debate. Once again, as we have seen many times before, that the report of the High Commissioner on Sri Lanka contains devastating and unprecedented critiques on Sri Lanka of the handling human rights in the country. Report based on the High Commissioner's usual convictions that deterioration in civil, political, minority, religious, and other democratic rights under the present administration, which she is going to say there are many areas need the UN Human Rights Council's urgent attention. Now we go into the Sri Lanka Accountability Project. What is this Sri Lanka Accountability Project in short forms, SLAP/SLAP? Sri Lanka Accountability Project is a product of the 46-1 resolution. When we look at the 2021 resolution, the most significant development about accountability in the resolution is operating paragraph 6. Operating paragraph 6 establishes a unit under the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights to operate without the government of Sri Lanka's participation. So this time, the first time, Office of High Commissioner itself was directly involved in intervening to gather data on Sri Lanka. The resolution introduced a new mechanism, which is to collect and preserve data outside of Sri Lanka. The purpose of this establishment is to use them later, if needed, in accountability processes, including the prosecutions, legal proceedings under the universal jurisdiction in respective member countries. Later, Human Rights High Commissioner's Office clarified the scope for SLAP, Sri Lanka Accountability Project, in a separate document, and it consists of 4 tasks. According to that document, it says the tasks are to collect, consolidate, preserve, and analyze information and evidence of violations and abuses of human rights and related crimes committed in Sri Lanka. Develop possible strategies for future accountability processes for gross violations and abuses of human rights or serious violations of international humanitarian law in Sri Lanka. Advocate for victims and survivors. Fourth one, support relevant judicial and other proceedings, including in the member states with competent jurisdiction. Those are the main tasks of the unit. The last task is more important. According to that, if any state with the competent jurisdiction initiates legal proceedings, Sri Lanka Accountability Project will provide the evidence it has gathered in support of that effect. This will make a significant difference to any state considering such a move, and the evidence itself will be treated with due seriousness since it comes from the UN agency. In other words, she advocates use the application of principle of universal jurisdiction in respective member states, which was first proposed by the previous Human Rights High Commissioner Zaid Al Hussein. So it is clear that the purpose of this evidence gathering process is to support prosecutions as suggested by the High Commissioner in her report calling member countries to prosecute individuals under the universal jurisdiction and further refer it to ICC if possible. Universal jurisdiction enables a state to claim criminal jurisdiction over a person accused of crime regardless of their nationality and the place of the crime was allegedly committed. The best example is the former president of Chile, Augusto Pinochet. Pinochet was arrested in London in 1998 on a Spanish warrant charging him with human rights violation in Chile during his time of the office. He was extradited to Spain and was tried in a Spanish court under the principle of universal jurisdiction. His claim of immunity was rejected by the British courts because torture and crimes against humanity did not form part of the functions of the head of a state, former head of a state. We are all aware that the accountability through the international judicial mechanism has been the main agenda item of the LTT-supported diaspora since the end of the war in 2009. Originally, the demand was for a fully functioning international mechanism. In 2015, Human Rights Council had been lowered this demand to hybrid court through a 30/1 resolution by upsetting some of the co-LTT supporters. However, the resolution had many other conditions paving the way for international prosecution. It is important to note that the then government had some legislations enacted as recommended by that resolution, such as the Office of Missing Persons to please the international community, show Sri Lanka's positive steps towards the accountability. Now we have the resolution 46-1, accepted by the Human Rights Council during the session March 2021, which is also more narrowed down the scope of the international investigation mechanism as originally demanded. We saw they lobbied for international independent investigation. UNHRC asked individual countries to use the universal jurisdiction at their discretion instead. Mainly, there is no doubt that this establishment, the Sri Lanka Accountability Project, this establishment itself violates the sovereignty of an independent state. Importantly, it contradicts itself by way of the resolution. First, the resolution reaffirmed the Human Rights Council's commitment to the sovereignty, independent unity, and territorial integrity of Sri Lanka, also reaffirming that it is the primary responsibility of each state to respect human rights, and then adding the operating paragraph 6 by contradicting themselves. So by saying that, to strengthen the OHCHR to collect, consolidate, analyze, preserve information and evidence for future accountability processes for gross violations of human rights or serious violations of international humanitarian law in Sri Lanka, etc., etc. So it is clearly showing that the resolution itself contradicts Human Rights Council's intention, the sovereignty of the Sri Lanka. So similar to the other earlier resolutions, the 46-1 is also not legally binding on Sri Lanka since Sri Lanka is not a party to it. Of course, there is an exemption, which was the 36-1. It was binding on Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka co-sponsored the resolution. Yet, 46.1 operating paragraph 6 in particular is intrusive of sovereign, independent and jurisdiction of Sri Lanka, threaten the efforts of government of Sri Lanka to develop it is reconciliation and accountability measures and introduce a serious risk to a non-recurrence of terrorism and to the unity and territorial integrity of the nation. Consequently, operating paragraph 6 is clear contravention of the mandates of the United Nations Human Rights Council and the OHCHR and the applicable articles of the UN Charter. There is no doubt that the Office of the High Commissioner has established the Sri Lanka Accountability Project, creating a dangerous precedent for all member countries. It is also important to note that Sri Lanka's response to this establishment. Sri Lanka is of the view that the evidence gathering mechanism contained Resolution 46.1, which led to a division in the Council, is unwarranted and unhelpful. It will lead to divisions and polarization in Sri Lanka. That is the remark. Those are the remarks made by the Sri Lankan government after passing the resolution. That is their response in regard to the Sri Lanka Accountability Project. It is positive that Sri Lanka would not be going to implement recommendation of the report over the most of the conditions of the resolution, especially the operating paragraph 6. This mechanism operates externally without Sri Lanka's involvement. Not only that, no one with a sensible mind would expect a country to cooperate with international evidence gathering exercise against their own country. There is no doubt that Sri Lanka would see this as a threat. So definitely the country is going to take every precaution to safeguard its interest and work against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard, for sending us your views on the SLAB project. And we are happy and offer our gratitude for you and your team's leadership in the UN to represent the voices of Sri Lanka. Next, we have Dr. Neville Hevagi to present. Now, Dr. Neville Hevagi is a senior policy analyst with the Ontario Policy Centre for Research. He obtained a PhD from the Laurentian University, Canada. He is also an adjunct professor and research fellow at the International Centre for Interdisciplinary Research in Law in the Laurentian University in Canada. I present to you Dr. Hevagi.
Thank you very much, Anura. A brief introduction. Today, my presentation also is the same topic. Then we are questioning the purpose of UNHRC Sri Lanka Accountability Project. In addition to that, I am going to explain and examine is in an attempt to undermine Sri Lanka's effect on accountability and the reconciliation. Now, when we look at the United Nations Human Rights Council mandate, but United Nations Human Rights Council was created by the General Assembly in 1993 through its resolution 48-101, which also details its mandates as follows. When you look at the 10 important characters of the United Nations Human Rights Council, it says, number 1, promote and protect. Second is a recommendation. Third position is the promote and protect again, right to development. Then fourth position is to provide technical assistance to the countries and coordinate human rights education, work actively to remove obstacles with the other countries and other groups. Engage dialogue with the government. That is one of the most important factors according to the Human Rights Council mandate. Enhance international cooperation. Coordinate human rights promotion and protection activities through the United Nations mechanism. In addition to that, rationalize and adapt strength and streamline human rights mechanism. When you look at this, the mandate, they are not the Human Rights Council is not the tribunal or the court, and it has no any legal authority and no enforcing power. However, we need to look at now what UNHRC is doing. When we look at the 2021 resolution 46-1, that is one of the most concerning for us, and the operative paragraph 6, as Jaraj explained. And it says, analyze evidence. That is a controversial paragraph. No any authority can organize or analyze evidence. Evidence belongs to the court. Court has to decide what are the information have been collected can be used as evidence. How United Nations, UNHRC, Madam Bachelet got this power. Then other issue we are concerning, violation and abuses of the human rights. There is no any international jurisdiction or either any country or any way committed and accepted or found Sri Lanka violated the human rights. How Madam Bachelet and his team and included Sri Lanka violated the human rights. Then other issue is that they want to advance accountability. That matter I will discuss in later. And High Commissioner wants to collect, consolidate, and analyze. Then now they come here as information and evidence that they are going to manipulate the information as evidence to use against the Sri Lanka and future accountability project. And again, this resolution and this accountability project is based on this 46.1. And again, Madam Bachelet and his team and his supportive team, especially is pushing through the LTT diaspora team. And it says gross violation of the human rights or serious violation of the international humanitarian law. However, Sri Lanka has not committed any violation of the international humanitarian law. In addition to that, it has not determined by any competent authority. Now, other important factor, as Jara said, relevant judicial and other proceeding. We need to find out what is the meaning of other proceeding. Ambiguous of there is no definite word put then on the operative paragraph. That's meaning this resolution is giving a power for them to whatever things they can do and other proceedings against the sovereign nation country. So that is the sovereign nation of Sri Lanka. It is to interfere with the sovereignty of the country. Now, when we analyze the 46 resolution, especially operative paragraph number 6, and we had to compare what is the LTTE, Liberation Tigers Tamil Elam, and the terrorist group, Tamil terrorist group, as a propaganda message. They have a propaganda message, it's a threefold. First one, Tamil are the innocent victim of Sinhalese discrimination and the government instigated military repression. And their second propaganda campaign around the world, the LTT represent the only capable of defending and promoting the interest of Sri Lankan Tamil community. In addition to that, the third agenda for the propaganda, they are going around the world and infiltrated into the United Nations Human Rights Council also. They are saying, and there can be no peace in Sri Lanka until the country's Tamils are granted their own independent state under governance of the LTT. That is the LTT threefold message is going through the whole time. Then throughout the war, after they defeated the war, then after defeated for the war, and they are still campaigning this against the Sri Lanka. When you look at these activities, that they want to undermine Sri Lanka military success against the Tamil terrorists as a human rights violation. So that is one of the major issues we need to highlight. And they are very unique target. They are selected government official and the military official are targeting so-called accountability. And then as the earlier speakers, they question why LTT, not any single person, individual, or not comes under target of the so-called international projects, or maybe under the UNHRC 46-1, the Special Accountability Project. And this is the LTTE, Tamil Terrorist International Mafia. There is no any doubt about that. They have very successfully infiltrated into the United Nations Human Rights Council. Now you can compare the difference between and very coordination between Human Rights Council 46-1 resolution, specifically paragraph 6, and the LTT propaganda. What is the coordination between? There's a very intercoordinated action. Now, let me look at the accountability. UNHRC and LTT diaspora supporting diaspora and so-called international projects, and the simple LTT NGOs depending on the LTT funds, and they want to promote the retributive justice. Retributive justice is a punishment, and LTT terrorist accountability or Madame Bachelet's accountability. That is the Madame Bachelet at the United Nations High Commissioner is attempted to promote the accountability. But there is no way, and there is no correct way or right way, and we can, as a country, as a sovereign nation, we can decide what is the best option for the accountability. And Madame Bachelet or LTTE remnant or their sympathizers, or depending on the LTT fund, so-called international projects or human rights lawyers are not determined what should be the best interest for the country. Best interest for the country, for the Sri Lanka, restorative justice. Sri Lanka very successfully implemented, built with the principle of the respect and the compassion and inclusivity based on the fundamental of the restorative justice, and we achieve accountability very successfully. And it is very unique that Sri Lanka approach, we have Sri Lanka rehabilitated 12,000 LTT card. And this 12,000 LTT card or 13,000 LTT card, and they have never committed the crime again. They are well integrated, and therefore Sri Lanka has a peace until now. Now, what is the purpose of Madame Bachelet or LTT remnant and got into the retributive justice? They have selected individual, selected military official, and selected government want to target and punish and put them into the accountability mechanism. That is the Madame Bachelet and UNHRC want to do. We are a sovereign nation. Sri Lanka has all rights to do whatever thing is right to work for the best work for the country. That's what Sri Lanka is doing. Then last 13 years, that LTT Tamil terrorist sympathizers, so-called international project, or another human rights lawyers, and they never attempted to spend any single dollar, any single euro to support reconciliation effort or rehabilitation Tamils in Sri Lanka. They have never built any single school. They have never built any water treatment facility. They have never supported demining activities. So that's how this LTT sympathizers are working. Their main propaganda, main objective is to discredit the country and undermine the country's effort. This is clearly affected and clearly reflect when you analyze in between both sides to keep in the both side UNHRC resolution 46-1 and the paragraph 6 and what is the LTT propaganda, as I explained earlier. Now, then I want to elaborate something how Sri Lanka is achieved the accountability and the reconciliation. As I told you earlier, Sri Lanka rehabilitated over 12,000 LTT cadre, and they have successfully integrated in society peacefully. Some of them are doctors, some of them are married, some of them are engineers. They are very successfully contributing into the Sri Lankan economy, and everybody is doing peacefully. In addition to that, I want to mention here, 60% of the Tamils are living in not the north and east. They are living in the south with the Sinhalese. If any accountability mechanism proposed by the LTTE and the Madam Bachelet's accountability mechanism to punish the people will damage the Sri Lanka's peaceful mechanism. That 12,000 LTT card, we are not sending them back to the jail again. We are not sending back them to the guillotine again. And we are not sending back to people who involved with this conflict that has been sorted out. And we are going to move the country with the restorative justice mechanism. In order to achieve the accountability and reconciliation, Sri Lanka established independent domestic institution. Number one, Office of Missing Persons, Office of the Reparation, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, Office for National Unity and Reconciliation, then Sustainable Development Council of Sri Lanka. Now, I'm not going to analyze and give the information to you and each and every organization what they are doing. What's most important for the accountability mechanism, Office of the Missing Person. And Office of the Missing Person approach, and we have a very unique approach has been developed according to the restorative justice mechanism. We have taken, Sri Lanka has taken a victim-centric approach and public engagement and decision-making process. And this decision-making process, and Sri Lanka is providing the affected the people or the conflict and state services, financial services, even compensation, obtaining certificates of the death and the pension, and obtaining certificates of the absence, ongoing legal cases support, and a dispute regarding assets if they have any tangible assets, and the succession and integrated into the. This is our united and unique aid-centric approach with the restorative justice mechanism. Under this Office of Missing Person, Sri Lanka has received 21,374 as of last week. After screening and remove the duplicates, and there are 14,981 cases to be processed. Then Sri Lanka also have a plan, the accountability to bring the justice for all the communities without regarding the other communities. Between 2000 and 2021, and 3 pesos has allocated, and between 1981 and 1999, and then after that, another mechanism is running to analyze the details and giving the support for the victim-centric approach with the before 1980. This is a very unique approach Sri Lanka has developed, and we are going to do it, and they are doing it, and it will be very successful. Then other important mechanism I want to highlight, Office of the Repartition. Office of the Repartition has identified the 8 supporters area. One is the provision of the livelihood support and compensation of the financial support, restitution of the land rights, and that other LTT diaspora is the promoting the campaign. There is a land grab for the Sri Lankan government. Out of 92% or more than 92% private land hand over back to the owners, but other lands there is no ownership for the land, and all the lands that LTT put them on the mining, discriminately mining, and then after that Sri Lankan government started the demining campaign, and therefore we were Sri Lanka able to put the 92% of the land to the private entity. And in addition to that, provision of housing, development of community infrastructure, administrative relief, and psychological support and measure to advance unity, reconciliation, and non-occurrence of violence. That is the most important matter Office of the Reparation is doing. And as of December 31st, 2021, and they have processed 5,964 claims and paid Sri Lankan rupees 399.8 million in support for reconciliation and accountability effort. That now, I want to highlight very important matter. Recently, 28 September and October 2019, United Nations Foreign Office has conducted the Foreign Office conducted the research finding office fact-finding mission in Sri Lanka. According to that fact-finding mission, it clearly says Tamils are not victims because of their Tamil. They have clearly identified our reconciliation effort is success, and the democratic functions are working, democratic institutions are working, that it is the LTT propaganda is not the real situation in Sri Lanka. In addition to that, Sri Lanka is achieving accountability with the unique mechanism based on restorative justice. Any activity with the UNHRC accountability project, Sri Lanka's accountability project, is there is a very clear LTT propaganda. And LTT propaganda, not only LTT propaganda and LTT sympathizers propaganda, so-called international projects and the so-called human rights lawyers, and depending on the LTT funds, they are continually involved and use UNHRC mechanism to attack Sri Lanka and undermine and destabilize the country, their own sinister move. And it will damage undermine the Sri Lanka's accountability effect and reconciliation effect too. It is clear, it is very clear what they are going to do. Now we have to act very correctly and very strongly, and we have to be united as a nation to fight against this misinformation campaign and what the international United Nations Human Rights Council wants to do on Sri Lanka. And this is clear. This is the Sri Lanka, this is undermining Sri Lanka's reconciliation effort and the accountability effort. And then other important thing there's other issues has raised by the UNHRC recent report. There's a lot of political issues they have addressed. According to the United Nations mandate, given the mandate with the resolution, UNHRC has no any power to interfere with the political matters in sovereign nation Sri Lanka. We can solve our own problem. You can do your human rights thing and you can provide the guidance, you can provide the technical assistance. We are ready and we are moving with the reconciliation effect. Now, so this is my end of presentation. I will take few questions, but I know that you might have a few questions and I will answer it, but I will stay in this platform. Thank you very much for listening my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hevagi, for that informative presentation, as well as thanks for putting your thoughts graphically on screen and explaining us all the details pertaining to the hypocrisy UN is having towards Sri Lanka. Also, thank you for addressing the concerns of retributive justice and restorative justice topics. We have received two questions. First one, if UNHRC acts beyond its mandate, what action can Sri Lanka take? How does civil society support such actions?
Actually, my question is here, whether UNHRC has a power to implement that mechanism in Sri Lanka. That first thing, but legally they cannot do it. Only thing what they can do, and the UNHRC mechanism is advisory role and especially promote and to support for the country for what they are doing. That is the mandate. But the 46-1 resolution at say other proceeding, that other proceeding is always LTT remnants and international so-called justice project, and looking at the heavily biased to the other side of the story. And they want to go with the international universal jurisdiction. and they want to punish with the other countries' universal jurisdiction mandate. There are a few countries, they have a power to do it. But if that is come to the Sri Lanka against for that kind of situation, there is the very strong argument against Sri Lanka. It is the interfere with the Sri Lanka's sovereignty. Sri Lanka is a sovereign nation. We are not the anybody's any longer colony. If this happens, there is a mechanism, we can go to the International Court of Justice and file against that the particular group or particular country, and they are interfering with the country's sovereignty. If this case is filed as a Sri Lanka, I think Sri Lanka should do, and if not, we will emphasize government to do, and if this situation happens, and we will fight for that one, and we will argue in the court and will provide the full legal support for them to, United Nations has no whatsoever to collect the evidence, and it has to be determined by the court. That mechanism has to be done at first, then we have to go for that kind of jurisdiction. So that is the mechanism. Then second thing, how we can support the, I think this is the question is twofold. One is what Sri Lanka can do, if I understand correctly, Andra.
That's right. And how does civil society support such actions?
Yes, that's correct. As a civil society, as an intellectual, and all the Sri Lankans, regardless of their ethnic origin, and the Tamil, Sinhalese, and Muslim, we have to work together on this against the propaganda against this country. And when you go to Sri Lanka, very peaceful country, everybody is living peaceful. As I told you, 60% of Tamil are living and integrated with the Sinhalese. There is no any problem. They can purchase the land, they can do the business, they can enter the universities, and now reconciliation process, everybody is healing. That healing process, we should not be damaged. And we know that some of the extremist groups in Sinhalese or maybe Tamils, they have acted against each other, and it damaged for the country and it damaged for everybody. We don't want to happen 1983 Black July. We don't want to happen another civil war started by the LTTE and other group. So therefore, this is the most important moment as a country, as a nation, we have to move forward. What we have to move forward, forget about the individual, the things, whatever happened in the past. Go through the restorative justice mechanism and healing process. It will take time to heal, we can understand, but we should not ignite any kind of ethnic violence in Sri Lanka. That is the most important matter Sri Lankan, the community as a civil society and the organization do. But unfortunately, there are human rights lawyers, they go to the European Commission and they talk about against the Sri Lanka. And they want to take out the GST plus. Who is going to affect for GST plus? But Tamils and Muslim other minority also working in the thousands of the factories under the GSTP plus. Then if they lose the job, who's going to hurt? They are our own people. Therefore, we should not allow any foreign intervention and any foreign the so-called justice projects and so-called human rights lawyers to act against the country. So that is my request for all citizens in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hirani, for that explanation. Next, we have Ms. Hiruni De Silva joining us from Colombo. Now, Hiruni is a Sri Lankan counterterrorism analyst. She obtained LLB from General Sir John Kottaravela Defense Academy, University in Sri Lanka. She's also a final year student at Sri Lanka Law College. She's currently reading for her MSc in International Relations at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK. Welcome, Hiruni.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Andra. I will be talking about the Sri Lanka's genuine attempt in repealing PTA with the counterterrorism bill. And most recently, in the repealed legislative instruments, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, Temporary Provisions Act number 48 of 1979 created a controversy. So the counterterrorism bill was repealing this PTA. Counterterrorism bill was tabled on 10th February this year. And I think this new counterterrorism bill is a salutary piece of legislation. This is a tangible protection to the victims under PTA in securing, advancing, and protecting their fundamental rights under the Constitution of Sri Lanka 1978. Against this counterterrorism bill, there were some oppositions created by the individuals, organizations who are inspired by trade unions, civil society organizations, and NGOs. Counterterrorism bill is a step taken forward by Sri Lanka, and it's vital move towards the realization of enforcing international best practices to address counterterrorism legislation in Sri Lanka. Mainly in the all the documents by UNHRC, they highlighted about some loopholes in PTA which was prevailed in Sri Lanka. There were a detention order referring to Section 9, a restriction order referring to Section 11, expressly recognizing judicial review of order referring to Section 10 and 26, expeditious disposal of cases in order to avoid long-term detention referring to Section 15, and repealing prohibition of publication referring to Section 14. And also they requested to introduce some provisions to grant access to suspects for their attorney at laws, and provisions to prevent maltreatments and torture during detention period, and also the right to communicate with their families. And there were 5 benchmarks in the UNHRC reports. First one is definition should be comply with the international norms. Secondly, they stated about ensuring precision and legal certainty. And thirdly, they talked about provisions to prevent and hold arbitrary deprivation of the liberty. Fourth, preventive measures to prevent torture, enforce disappearances. And fifth one is a fair trial guaranteed by judicial review and legal counsel. When considering the first one, which states about the definition which should be complied with international norms, actually the term terrorism or the terrorist cannot be actually exactly defined, because if we are going to give a definition even to a certain extent, we have some facts to be referred. One of them is we should analyze the threats prevailing in the state, and we should analyze the threat level, the level of the threat that we have. And also we should shed light upon the prior experiences and what are the conflicts we had and what sort of terrorist threats we are facing and we faced. Those things we have to shed light upon. And Sri Lanka suffered for 30 years war from LTT, which started in 1983. Then the LTT atrocities at then did not enhance in the mass killings, but they only engaged with the target killings of the individuals, of certain people. Then the LTT changed their strategy to mass killing since 1987 until the war ended. And also after the Easter Sunday attack in Sri Lanka, which was committed by IS terrorists, we had to face a huge level of threat, which created by another type which deviate from LTT. So considering all these things, Sri Lanka cannot define accurate, give an accurate definition to the term terrorism. So, but I think the counterterrorism legislative bill has tried its best to give a sort of a framework, to get an idea that what is terrorism and what will fall under the terrorism in Sri Lanka, in Sri Lankan legal framework. For that, in the new counterterrorism bill, they referred to Section 2 and Section 3, which generally outline the definition of terrorism. That means they talk about what falls under the terrorism in general terms. Section 3, subsection 2, it elaborates the acts that falls under the terrorism. It tells what are the acts that falls under terrorism. Section 6, it refers to the offenses associated with the terrorism offenses. Section 7, it specifically states about what are the acts fall under terrorism. What are the specified acts? Section 8 talks about the aggravated criminal acts, which can be considered as terrorist act under this counterterrorism bill. And Section 9 talks about associated terrorist acts. And Section 10 talks about abetting. That means what the consequences of supporting terrorism can lead. What are the wrongful acts that can construe in the act of supporting the terrorism? And also the second benchmark is ensuring precision and legal certainty. This can be discussed in two aspects. First one is freedom of expression. Second one is freedom of religion. And freedom of expression is included in the Fundamental Rights chapter of Sri Lankan Constitution in Article 40. And also freedom of religion is included in Article 10. When referring to the freedom of expressions, we cannot let the misinformation, disinformation, and online manipulations to be granted as freedom of expressions. For that, the Sri Lankan government has taken a new step, which is under process. That means Sri Lankan government has taken measures to draft online falsehood and manipulation acts to overcome the issues with the freedom of expressions, which are misinformation, disinformation, and online manipulations. And also, when considering about the freedom of religion, and also Sri Lanka cannot be let to be spoiled with extremist ideologies. And extremist ideologies doesn't mean it is a freedom of religion. Separatist ideologies doesn't mean the freedom of religion. So within Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka has not granted any sort of freedom for the extremist ideologies, to spread of extremist ideologies. Sri Lanka allows religions which have coexistence, which supports the coexistence and Sri Lankan culture, which supports all Sri Lankans to live as one, to be considered as Sri Lankans, not to be separated. So those laws, those ideologies are not accepted in Sri Lanka. And also the religious extremism is seen in the purview of national security threat in Sri Lanka and not considered as any sort of freedom of religion. Measures, third benchmark, as UNHRC states, measures to prevent and hold arbitrary deprivation of liberty. This is mentioned in the Article 13 of Sri Lankan Constitution. In here, we need to shed light upon Article 13, subsection 5, which states about retrospective nature of law in criminal offences. And also Article 13.6, which states about a person is not guilty unless is innocent unless he or she is proven guilty. And also these sections should be subjected to Article 15. This Article 15 of the Constitution talks about restriction in these provisions when it is a case of a national security. This retrospective nature and person is innocent unless he is proven guilty can be subjected to restrictions in the matters of national security. And also this is reflected in the counterterrorism bill in the provisions related to detention. Because detention is the method of sort of a deprivation of arbitrary freedom to move, and arbitrary deprivation of liberty is reflected in detention itself. For detention, in this counterterrorism bill, it says about that a magistrate visits the suspect every 14 days. That means when the magistrate visits the person, then he can talk to the magistrate. He can make a complaint if he's tortured or if there's any means of illegal thing happening to him. And also, when the person is arrested, when the suspect is arrested, the notification should be made to Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka about the detention within 72 hours. And also the copy of detention order should be submitted to them as well. And also the next king of the suspect should be informed about the arrest and the detention within the 24 hours. Then the provision stating that the express provision states in the counterterrorism bill that every measure should be taken to protect the suspect from physical harm. That means the person cannot be tortured. And maintaining a database. The new bill talks about maintaining a database, which is a significant feature of the bill. Because if we maintain a database, we cannot face there cannot be complaints of enforced disappearances. Because when the database is made, we have to include who are arrested, on what charges, where they are detained, how long, and when their cases are they concluded or not. So we have all these databases, and all suspects are being monitored, and also the authorities are being monitored. And there's a significant feature which is appeal mechanism. This appeal mechanism is very important because when the detention period is extended, then police can make their excuses or the reason to detain the person. And also in the perspective of the suspectant, he can also in front of the court, he can appeal that he can make his excuses asking to reduce the detention period or to grant bail. And also the new counterterrorism bill has granted the access for family to reach the family and to consult the attorney at law during the period of detention. And the detaining period cannot be more than 2 weeks, and the maximum period is 8 weeks. And also when they are extending the 8 weeks to more, they have to again produce the suspect to the magistrate. And also these type of trials under this act should be conducted in a day-to-day basis. This is also to reduce the detention period. These are the measures taken to reduce issues created with the detention of the person, where all the UNHRC documents are alleging Sri Lanka regarding the PTA. And also, nextly, they ensure preventive measures for torture and enforced disappearances. When considering about this aspect also, we need to refer the detention provisions, and also there are some provisions as well. In the new bill, it says the copy of the order of detention should be given to the next king. The first person in the family should be given about the copy of a detention order of the suspect, and also inform the next king of the suspect within 24 hours. And again, the maintaining of the database also applies for this. Producing the suspect to the magistrate, and also it particularly states that the magistrate should look into the suspect for his well-being. It is particularly and expressly mentioned in the new bill. And also expressly the new bill states that the person or the suspect should be treated humanely. That means cannot be tortured. Torturing is an offense. And also family and the attorney at law of the suspect should be allowed to meet or to have an interview with the suspect. And also, considering about this, the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka should approve the detaining place. It applies to the detention issues and also for the issues related to torture and enforced disappearances. As the fifth, fair trial guaranteed by judicial review and the legal counsel was the fifth benchmark made by UNHRC documents. Here, the trial is held at high courts of Sri Lanka, and also the provisions in the new bill states that these kind of issues should be given priority in taking the trials, because these are one of the concerns in the national security. So they should be given priority, and also this can reduce the threat to the suspect, and also detention period can also be reduced. And also the conducting of the trials are based on day-to-day basis, as I said. For the suspects who are made guilty for voluntarily participating in acts under this new bill, they are directed to rehabilitation process. This is also a significant feature in this bill, because when they are recognized as terrorists, they should be rehabilitated, because earlier we didn't have any sort of a rehabilitation process. And also other legislations related to rehabilitation process are being drafted. And this new counterterrorism bill has the most significant feature in this bill is bail, granting bail, the provision for granting bail. This bail is granted if the court fails to conclude the case after 1 year of filing the indictment. So these are the benchmarks which are stated in the UNHRC documents, and they are being addressed to the best of the ability of the country with the new counterterrorism bill, though we are being alleged for not repealing it. And the new counterterrorism bill is clearly complying with the principles of legality, necessity, and proportionality, which are international norms. And also, Sri Lankan government has taken steps to mitigate the threats created by misinformation, disinformation, and the fake news, manipulated information through the Online Falsehood and Manipulation Act. And also, we need to consider about why we need to repeal the new counterterrorism bill, because the previous bill could not address the issues. There were some issues which could not be addressed through the PTA. Therefore, government thought of bringing this new counterterrorism bill. And also, we need to talk about how LTT strategy also changed. LTT strategy earlier was, their modus operandi was propaganda, fundraising, procurement, and shipping, which they changed to lobbying, litigation, and lawmaking in the virtual domain. And also, we had to face the ISIS organization threat. They also did mass killings, and also they also used to manipulate the cyberspace. They used all the cyberspace social media platforms in order to spread their ideology and also to manipulate people. When we look into the investigation reports, we see that. And also PTA, though it complies with the international best practices and international human rights norms, the sovereignty of the country should not be allowed to disturb. And also the government has taken steps to adhere to the international best practices. For that, either the state sovereignty or the national security should not be sacrificed. And also the attempt taken by Sri Lanka in repealing this PTA with the counterterrorism new bill should not be denounced as a token effort. It should be considered as, and it should be complemented. And also, as Sri Lankans, we should not let the UN-headed Western powers and their power hunger to discredit or dishonor Sri Lanka and to interfere with the Sri Lankan state sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Hirani, for that great presentation. Thanks for explaining us the key facts of the counterterrorism bill within the Sri Lankan legal framework. There is a greater need to highlight to ensure that there will not be another extremist uprising in Sri Lanka. Obviously, pro-extremist groups and lobbies will be hurt most from this bill, it seems. It seems their propaganda machine is far outreaching than the message of the need for sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Sri Lanka. We have received a couple of questions, and one of the first question is, how does the current PTA bill apply to underage groups? You are muted. Hirani, you are muted. Sorry, you are muted. Thank you.
In the Act itself, it refers to the, in Section 90, in Section 90, it refers that issues related to underage groups are done according to the Children and Young Persons Ordinance, which is a legislation of Sri Lanka. The issues related to underage groups are governed by that ordinance. It is stated in the Section 90 of the new bill.
Great. And what are the measures in the PTA bill to meet the transparency in the purview of human rights?
In the purview of human rights, in order to maintain transparency, I think they have many provisions. As I said, to maintain the transparency in the detention period, they have made magistrate to visit the suspect in 14 days, notify the Human Rights Commission in Sri Lanka within 72 hours, and to inform the next king within 24 hours, access to family and the attorney at law during the detention period, and expressly stating that person should be treated with humanity. And also, I think maintaining database is the main significance point that we can tell that there's a transparency, because maintaining database in itself creates a transparency.
Great. Thank you, Hirani. So we have concluded the 4 presentations by the subject matter experts. The question for this presentation has been the purpose of UNHR's accountability project. I would like to have some closing remarks up to 2 minutes by our presenter, starting with Shivanti. Your final thoughts on the accountability measures.
Well, like I said, we have to understand what is the motive here. Without understanding the motive, by just grappling over the other issues, is just, going through the semantics, and that's not going to take us anywhere. And that's what has happened, if you really look at it since the conclusion of the war. We've been struggling to establish that what we did was not a crime. It was not a crime, and that it was essential for the well-being of everybody, not just one community as per se. But this whole thing got perverted in the sense that the war victory became perverted as a war crime, and the peace became the victor's triumph. So even today, you see people are reluctant, even Sri Lankans are reluctant to talk about it because it's such a politicized issue these days. So that is why, even in response to my earlier question as to how to counter this, we have to establish our own story, without which, we are, it's what we are right now, what we're doing is, it's akin to swimming in a cesspool, trying to look for fresh water, as it were. So we cannot be in this same, trying to appease these, those who are against us. We have to stand up, and we have every right to stand up, and we have the evidence on our side to stand up. Our failure to do that in a concise manner, and our failure to be proactive, our constant, appeasing manner, and we are more reactive, more defensive. That is really counterproductive. So we should not waste our time, feeling sorry for ourselves or getting angry over the hypocrisy. That is whatever they do, the Western agenda, it is for their interest. So we have to make peace with that. What we have to do is understand where we want to go with this, and then work towards that. That's what we need to do.
Thank you, Shivanti. Next, we move on to Dr. Hevage. Your final thoughts? 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Arura. Actually, I'm totally agree with Shivanti. And so what we have to do, and so we have seen LTT remnants and so-called justice projects around the world, and the so-called human rights lawyers and other political parties, they are working on their own agenda. And they are not the benefit of working for the Tamil people. That one of the questions I want to ask, that those human rights lawyers, those the justice project for the international justice project, and have they done anything to support the Tamil and minority people in Sri Lanka? Nothing. So even they couldn't give her the one small pencil and the book to go to the school for the Tamil young people. And they want to create the issue in Sri Lanka, to create the LTT ideology and create the money. So this is the money-making machine, because we know that and Sri Lanka is not stable, or that kind of violence happening, who's going to benefit it? And they can initiate the refugee program. And we have come across that every single refugee is coming to Canada and paying more than $35,000. Roughly some cases, $65,000. There are some groups is ready to prepare the document, prepare the torturing, fake torturing, and to prove it has happened in Sri Lanka. So that kind of situation. So therefore, what we have to do, and as a nation, as a country, and we need to, rather than counter and reactive, we need to have a proper program to counter their allegation, counter their, against for us. So in that case, we will be successful. We should not be counter-reactive, and we should not be all the time defensive. We need to proactive, and we start telling our side of the story. This is what is happening. Even most of the people around the world, so when I look at them and ask them, I talk to several conferences about the conflict, and they don't know 60% Tamils are living in Sinhalese, and they think that they are separated people, and they don't know marriage of the in between the communities has been drastically increased, and they live with the peace and harmony. So this message has to be driven, has to be get out. So that's what the LTT propaganda wants to do. That's what they are doing in Canada also, and they want to go to the Bill 104 and divide the community, and they can make the money. Then after that, they will go and they will raise the money, and they are living very luxuriously without doing a job, and collecting funds for them, and turn individual against each other. So that is their job. So therefore, we need to be proactive and provide our mechanisms and our idea, and what is the real situation, how we can successfully achieve the accountability and reconciliation and the peaceful country in Sri Lanka.
Thank you. Welcome. Hiruni, what's your last thoughts, closing remarks?
Yes, Anura. First of all, I would like to, last but not least, I would like to ask all the Sri Lankans to think as Sri Lankans, understand the allegations, and do not let Sri Lanka to be allocated falsely. And I think most of the international Western powers, so-called Western powers, the powerful nations and the politicians who are talking against and trying to allege Sri Lanka and its security forces are interconnected to LTT international network. They are being funding. That's why they are trying to rise against Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has no justice. And why don't they shout against Russia? They are standing against Sri Lanka. So I think all these politicians are being manipulated with the international terrorist network. They are being funded. That's why they are falsely alleging Sri Lanka and its security forces. And also, in the Sri Lankan government has not allowed any sort of extremist ideologies, any sort of fake news manipulation, which the UNHRC states as a freedom of expression means they are asking to allow online manipulations. They are asking to allow fake news. That is not the freedom of expressions. And freedom of religion doesn't mean the leading to spread extremist ideologies. So I think other states should not be interfere with the state sovereignty of the other states. We all have a state sovereignty, and we should protect, as Sri Lankans, we should stand against to protect our state sovereignty from the Western nations. We should not let any sort of Western nation to interfere with the Sri Lankan state sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes the presentation organized by the Ontario Centre for Policy Research. Thanks for joining from all over the world to listen to our subject matter experts. And my sincere thanks to Ontario Centre for Policy Research for inviting me to moderate today's presentation. Until we meet again, we wish you a great day, a good night, and a good evening. Thanks and best wishes. Bye-bye.